Hello everyone, and welcome back. I'm Jump Scare Man. Let's begin. On a freezing November night in 2014, veteran truck driver Raymond Carter was hauling electronics eastbound along Interstate 80 through the mountains of Wyoming. He had been driving for nearly 23 years, and there was very little left on the road that could genuinely rattle him. He had seen overturned rigs, blizzards that swallowed entire highways, and enough accidents to know that the interstate could turn deadly without warning. Still, there was one particular stretch near Elk Mountain that every experienced driver talked about in hushed tones, usually after midnight, usually when the coffee was getting low and the parking lot was almost empty. The locals called it the dead stretch. Raymond had heard the stories for years, drivers reporting phantom headlights in their mirrors, only for them to vanish when they changed lanes, strange radio chatter from voices that didn't identify themselves, a woman in a blue coat walking along the shoulder during storms, even when temperatures dropped well below freezing. Raymond never put much stock in any of it. Truckers, after all, spend long hours alone. The mind can do remarkable things when it's tired. That night, however, conditions were unusually bad. Snow whipped across the highway in violent gusts, and visibility was often reduced to less than 100 feet, the kind of weather that makes every mile feel like 10. Raymond kept both hands firmly on the wheel as his 18-wheeler pushed through the storm. The trailer groaned behind him, buffeted by crosswinds strong enough to shove lighter vehicles right off the road. At 1:47 a.m., his CB radio crackled. "Eastbound Schneider near mile marker 255, you got company behind you." Raymond glanced into his side mirrors. Nothing but swirling snow. He picked up the microphone. "Say again." "I'm not seeing anyone." No answer. He checked the channel. It was the standard trucker frequency. Static hissed softly in the cab. Raymond shrugged it off and continued climbing the grade. A few minutes later, his dashboard clock flickered. The digital numbers went blank for nearly 3 seconds. When they came back, the time read 1:47 a.m. Raymond frowned. He distinctly remembered seeing 1:52 just moments earlier. Electrical issues weren't uncommon, especially in extreme cold. He made a mental note to have it checked later. Then his engine brake engaged on its own. The sudden deceleration jolted him forward. Raymond immediately disabled it, muttering under his breath. The truck resumed speed. A mile later, he saw taillights ahead. A semi-truck, old model, box trailer. No visible company markings. It was moving much slower than traffic should have been, especially given the dangerous conditions. Raymond eased off the throttle and maintained a safe distance. Snow continued hammering the windshield. The truck ahead drifted slightly toward the shoulder, then corrected. Its trailer swayed unnaturally, almost like it was fighting a strong side wind. Raymond reached for the CB. "Driver ahead, you okay?" Silence. He tried again. Nothing. Then, without warning, the truck's brake lights illuminated. Hard. Raymond slammed his own brakes, ABS rattling violently beneath him. His trailer fishtailed before straightening. For a split second, he thought he was about to die. But the truck ahead was gone. Not over the hill. Not in the ditch. Gone. Raymond's headlights revealed nothing but empty interstate stretching into the storm. His breathing quickened. He checked his mirrors repeatedly, convinced the vehicle had somehow slipped behind him. There was nowhere it could have gone. No exit. No shoulder wide enough. No tracks in the fresh snow. The CB crackled again. A woman's voice, calm and distant. "You shouldn't follow them." Raymond nearly dropped the microphone. "Who is this?" No response, only static. Then another voice broke through. Male this time, panicked and distorted. Black ice. We're going over." The transmission ended in a burst of feedback so loud, Raymond winced. He pulled into the next truck stop near Laramie just after 3 a.m. His nerves were shot, and he desperately needed coffee. Inside, he told 2 other drivers what had happened. Neither seemed surprised. One older man set down his mug and nodded toward the window. "Happened near mile 255? Raymond slowly nodded. The man leaned back. "You're not the first." According to him, a fatal pileup had occurred there during a blizzard in 1987. A truck lost control on black ice, jackknifed, and triggered a chain reaction involving several semis and passenger vehicles. Multiple people died, including a husband and wife traveling in a blue sedan. Since then, drivers had reported seeing phantom trucks during storms. Some claimed they heard desperate CB transmissions replaying the final moments of the crash. Others reported being warned away from dangerous patches of road by voices no one could identify. Raymond listened, skeptical but unsettled. Then the older driver asked a question that made his stomach drop. "Did you hear the woman?" Raymond stared. "How'd you know that?" The man didn't answer immediately. Instead, he pulled a weathered newspaper clipping from his wallet. It showed the aftermath of the 1987 accident. Among the wreckage was a crushed blue sedan. A young woman stood beside it in the photograph, wrapped in a blanket, staring directly at the camera. "She died in the ambulance," the man said quietly. "A lot of drivers think she's the one giving warnings." Raymond laughed nervously, though it came out hollow. The next morning, after the storm had passed, he reviewed his dashcam footage. At exactly 1:47 a.m., the screen filled with static for 4 seconds. When the picture returned, there was no truck ahead of him, but there was something else. Standing on the right shoulder, barely visible through the snow, was a woman in a dark blue coat. She wasn't moving. She wasn't waving. She was simply watching the highway. Raymond froze the frame and zoomed in. Her face was pale, almost featureless, but her eyes were unmistakable. They were fixed directly on his cab. He never drove that stretch at night again. Years later, he still refused loads that took him across Wyoming during winter storms, and whenever younger drivers asked him why, he would simply say the same thing every time. "If your radio tells you that you've got company, check your mirrors." He would pause then, his expression turning serious. "And if you don't see anyone back there, keep driving." The road between Kingman and the California state line has always had a dark reputation among truckers. It is a long, lonely stretch of Interstate 40 where the desert seems endless and the night feels heavier than usual. Once the sun goes down, the mountains become black silhouettes, and the only thing ahead is an unbroken ribbon of asphalt disappearing into the darkness. For decades, drivers have whispered about one particular section near the abandoned mining town of Yucca. Some call it the Devil's Corridor. Others simply know it as mile marker 37. Veteran truck driver Daniel Mercer first experienced it in August of 2018. He was hauling dry goods from Los Angeles to Albuquerque, keeping to a strict overnight schedule. Daniel had driven more than 1,000,000 miles in his career. He was practical, experienced, and not the type to believe in ghost stories. At least, not until that night. It was shortly after 1 a.m. when he crossed into Arizona. Even at that hour, the desert heat still rose from the pavement. His CB radio was mostly quiet, interrupted only by the occasional chatter from distant drivers. His phone lost signal. A moment later, the CB crackled to life. A low, distorted voice came through the static. "Driver, you've got a child in the road." Daniel's grip tightened around the steering wheel. He looked ahead. At first, there was nothing. Then his headlights caught a small figure standing directly in the center lane, a little girl. She looked no older than 8. She wore a pale dress that moved gently in the warm desert wind. Her dark hair hung over her face. Daniel hit the brakes instantly and swerved into the left lane. The trailer shuddered behind him. As he passed, the girl slowly turned toward him. For one impossible second, Daniel saw her face. There were no eyes, no nose, no mouth, only smooth, pale skin. Then she was gone, not running, not stepping aside, gone. Daniel fought to steady the truck as his heart pounded in his chest. He grabbed the microphone. "Did anyone else see that?" A few seconds later, another driver answered. "You're near Yucca, aren't you?" Daniel felt a chill despite the desert heat. "Yeah." The reply came immediately. Don't stop for anyone out there." Then the radio went silent. Daniel kept driving. About 15 minutes later, headlights appeared in his mirrors. An old pickup truck. It stayed exactly 3 truck lengths behind him. No matter how fast he drove, it never gained and never fell back. 65, 70, 75, still there. Daniel changed lanes. The pickup followed. He moved back. It did the same. Then the CB crackled again. The same voice, this time urgent. "Whatever you do, don't let it pull beside you." Daniel barely had time to react. The pickup accelerated. Its headlights rose as it moved into the passing lane. Daniel glanced to his left. The driver's seat was empty. No hands on the wheel. No one behind the glass. But someone was sitting in the passenger seat. The little girl. She was staring directly at him, and now she had a face. Her smile stretched impossibly wide, far beyond what any human mouth should allow. Daniel jerked the wheel in terror. The pickup surged ahead, cut across his front bumper, and vanished into the darkness. Not down an exit, not over a hill. It simply disappeared. Daniel didn't stop until he reached a truck plaza in Needles. He was pale, shaking, and struggling to hold his coffee cup steady. An older driver at the counter listened quietly as Daniel explained everything. When he finished, the man nodded. "My brother saw that same truck back in 1996. Daniel turned toward him. The old man stared into his coffee before continuing. "He stopped after seeing a little girl on the shoulder. Thought she needed help." Daniel swallowed. "What happened?" The man took a slow breath. "Police found his rig parked perfectly on the side of the highway the next morning. Engine running, trailer sealed." Daniel waited. "They found my brother wandering 20 miles into the desert." He leaned closer. "He never fully recovered." Daniel's voice dropped. "What did he say happened?" The old man's expression hardened. He said the girl climbed into his cab, looked at him and asked one question. Daniel felt his stomach tighten. "What was it?" The man met his eyes. "Can I ride inside your skin?" Daniel didn't sleep that night. When he finally gathered the courage to review his dashcam footage, the little girl never appeared on the highway, but the pickup did, for exactly 12 seconds. And during those 12 seconds, the driver's seat was completely empty. To this day, Daniel still drives cross-country, but he will never accept another load through western Arizona after dark, because somewhere near mile marker 37 on that endless stretch of Interstate 40, something still waits beside the road, and sometimes it asks for a ride. The stretch of Interstate 70 that cuts through the mountains of Colorado is beautiful during the day. Towering peaks, dense pine forests, and winding roads that seem carved directly into the rock. But after midnight, especially in winter, that same highway becomes something else entirely. Truckers have a name for the section west of the Eisenhower-Johnson Memorial Tunnel. They call it the Silent Grade. It is a long descent where radio signals often fade. GPS systems occasionally lose track, and more than a few drivers have reported seeing things that simply should not exist. In January of 2019, veteran driver Thomas Walker was hauling frozen food from Denver to Salt Lake City. He had made the run dozens of times before. The weather that night was clear, but temperatures had dropped well below zero, leaving patches of ice hidden beneath the dark pavement. Thomas crossed the Eisenhower Tunnel a little after 2 a.m. Traffic was light. The mountains were silent. Too silent. His CB, normally filled with chatter from westbound drivers, had gone completely dead. No static, no voices, nothing. Thomas adjusted the volume knob twice, but the radio remained silent. Then his dashboard lights flickered, just once. He frowned and glanced at the gauges. Everything looked normal. A mile later, his trailer brake warning flashed briefly, then disappeared. Thomas muttered to himself, blaming the cold. That was when he saw the headlights. A semi-truck was coming up fast behind him, far too fast for that grade. Thomas checked his mirrors again. The truck closed the distance in seconds, its headlights glaring so brightly they nearly blinded him. It moved into the left lane to pass. As it drew even with his cab, Thomas glanced over. The truck was ancient, probably from the late 70s. Rust covered the trailer. There were no company markings, and there was no one in the driver's seat. Thomas stared, certain he had imagined it. Then he saw movement. A figure stood behind the cab, visible through the small sleeper window, not sitting, standing. Its face was pressed flat against the glass. Thomas instinctively swerved, tires hissing across the icy pavement. The other truck surged ahead and disappeared around a curve. Thomas immediately grabbed the CB. "Westbound. Anyone just passed me near the tunnel?" Only static answered. He accelerated slightly, hoping to catch up. When he rounded the next bend, the road ahead was empty. No taillights, no truck, nothing. His pulse quickened. There were no exits, no pullouts large enough for a semi, no sign that any vehicle had left the highway. Then his CB exploded with sound. A man's voice screamed through the speaker. "Brake failure, can't stop, move!" Thomas nearly jumped out of his seat. The transmission dissolved into metal grinding, horns blaring, and a sound like something massive tearing apart. Then silence returned. Absolute silence. Thomas drove another 10 miles before pulling into a rest area near Silverthorne. His hands were trembling. Inside, 2 other truckers were drinking coffee. When Thomas described the truck, one of them slowly set down his cup. "Old Peterbilt? Rusted trailer? No logos?" Thomas nodded. The driver's face darkened. "You're not the first." According to local drivers, a fully loaded semi had lost its brakes on that same descent in 1978. The driver had radioed frantically for traffic to clear the road. He never made it. The truck slammed into several vehicles before crashing through a guardrail and plunging into the canyon below. The driver and everyone in the cars he struck were killed instantly. Since then, drivers have reported seeing the same rig descending the mountain late at night, always too fast, always silent, and always empty. Thomas tried to laugh it off, but the sound came out thin. The second trucker leaned forward. "Did you see anyone in the sleeper?" Thomas slowly nodded. The man didn't smile. "Most people do." Thomas felt the blood drain from his face. "Who is it?" The trucker looked toward the snowy mountains outside. "Nobody knows." The next morning, Thomas reviewed his dashcam. At the exact moment the phantom truck should have appeared, the video distorted with heavy static. When the image cleared, there was no semi beside him, but there was something reflected in his passenger side window, a pale face, sunken eyes, its mouth stretched open in a silent scream. Thomas sold that dash cam the same week. He still drives today, but whenever his route takes him through Colorado, he refuses to cross the Eisenhower Tunnel after dark, because somewhere on that frozen descent, an old truck is still racing downhill, its brakes are still gone, its driver is still missing, and something is still standing in the sleeper, waiting for another truck to pull alongside. The desert outside Barstow has a way of making drivers feel small. During the day, it stretches endlessly beneath a merciless sun. At night, it becomes something else entirely. The darkness out there is absolute, broken only by headlights and the occasional distant glow of another truck moving across the horizon. For drivers traveling east on Interstate 15 toward Las Vegas, there is a stretch near Baker that many seasoned truckers refuse to discuss for long. Some call it the Black Flats. Others simply refer to it as the Long Mirror. The name comes from an old story that has circulated among truckers since the late 1980s. A driver looks into his side mirror and sees another truck following him. The problem is, no matter how many times he checks, the truck never gets closer, never falls behind, and never appears in any other mirror. In September of 2021, long-haul driver Eric Dalton was hauling consumer electronics from Los Angeles to Salt Lake City. He had driven that route countless times. It was routine, predictable, just another overnight run through the Mojave. At least, that's what he expected. A little after 2 a.m., Eric passed Baker. Traffic thinned until the interstate seemed completely empty. The moon was hidden behind a blanket of clouds, leaving the desert darker than usual. His podcast had just ended when he noticed headlights in his driver's side mirror, a semi, far behind him. Nothing unusual there. He glanced back a minute later. Same distance, same position. Eric frowned. He accelerated slightly. The truck remained exactly where it was. He slowed down. Still there. 5 minutes passed, then 10. The headlights never changed. Eric switched lanes. The lights stayed in the same mirror. That was impossible. He checked the passenger side mirror. Nothing. He looked through the rear window. No headlights. Only darkness. Yet in the driver's side mirror, the truck was still there, perfectly centered. Eric felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. He grabbed the CB. Southbound. Anybody behind me near Baker? Static answered. He tried again. This time a voice replied immediately. Don't look at it too long. Eric froze. Who said that? No answer. He turned the volume up. Only static. He told himself it was a prank. A very bad prank. Still, he couldn't stop checking the mirror. Each time the truck appeared a little clearer. An old cab overmodel, the kind rarely seen anymore. Its chrome grille gleamed unnaturally bright in the darkness. No company logo, no trailer markings, and no visible driver. Eric's mouth went dry. He forced himself to focus on the road ahead. Then his phone rang. No caller ID. Against his better judgment, he answered. All he heard was engine noise, deep, heavy, like a diesel idling inches away. Then a voice whispered, "Pull over." Eric threw the phone onto the passenger seat. At that exact moment, the headlights in his mirror vanished. He exhaled sharply, almost laughing from relief. Then he looked forward. The truck was directly in front of him. No merge, no passing. It was simply there, less than 50 feet ahead. Eric slammed on the brakes. His trailer bucked violently behind him. The old cab over rolled silently down the interstate, its taillights glowing a dull red. He could now see that the rear doors of its trailer were hanging slightly open. Something inside was moving, not shifting cargo, moving. Eric reached for the CB again, but before he could speak, a transmission burst through the speaker. A terrified male voice shouted over roaring wind, "It's in the trailer! It's in the trailer! Don't let it out!" The message ended with a crash of static. Then the truck ahead drifted slowly onto the shoulder, its brake lights illuminated. Eric had to decide in a split second, stop or keep going. Every instinct told him to drive, so he did. He accelerated and passed without looking directly into the cab, but he couldn't help glancing at the trailer. The right rear door had swung fully open. Inside, illuminated by his headlights, stood a tall figure pressed against the darkness. It was too thin. Its arms were too long, and its head nearly touched the ceiling. Eric never saw a face, only two pale eyes reflecting back at him. When he finally reached a truck stop in Prim, he was shaking so badly he could barely climb down from the cab. An older trucker listened carefully as Eric described the encounter. When he finished, the man nodded slowly. "My father saw that truck in 1989. Eric stared. The old driver took a sip of coffee. A livestock hauler disappeared on that route. Truck was found abandoned in the desert 3 days later. What happened to the driver? The old man looked away. They never found enough of him to say. Eric didn't sleep that morning, or the next night. When he reviewed his dash cam footage, the road ahead was completely empty the entire time. No truck, no headlights, nothing. But in the driver's side mirror, visible for nearly 11 straight minutes, the reflection of an old cab over followed him through the dark. And in one frozen frame, just before the call came in, something could be seen standing in the passenger seat of that reflected truck, watching him. Eric still drives long haul, but there is one rule he follows without exception. If you ever see headlights in only one mirror and nowhere else, do not answer your phone. The mountains of West Virginia are beautiful during the day, but at night they become something ancient. The trees crowd the highway so tightly that their branches seem to lean over the asphalt, shutting out even the moon. On certain stretches of Interstate 77, a trucker can drive for miles without seeing another vehicle. That isolation is exactly why so many drivers hate running the overnight route near the East River Mountain Tunnel. They call the road beyond it Widow's Run. The name comes from a story that has circulated among Appalachian truckers for generations. Most dismiss it. Those who don't refuse to discuss it after dark. In October of 2020, veteran trucker Samuel Hayes was hauling auto parts from Detroit to Charlotte. He had driven the Eastern Corridor for nearly 18 years and considered himself impossible to scare. Storms, mechanical failures, mountain grades. He had handled them all. But nothing had prepared him for Widow's Run. Samuel entered the East River Mountain Tunnel shortly after 3 a.m. The tunnel was nearly empty. His headlights bounced off the concrete walls, and the roar of his engine echoed behind him. Halfway through, his CB radio emitted a sharp burst of static. Then a woman's voice whispered only 3 words. "He's behind you." Samuel checked his mirrors instinctively. Nothing. He muttered a curse and continued through the tunnel. As soon as he emerged on the West Virginia side, his dashboard clock reset to 12 o'clock. His GPS screen went black. The temperature display dropped from 42 degrees to -3. Then the cab went silent. Not normal highway silence, complete silence. The hum of the engine faded. The tires seemed to make no sound against the pavement. Even Samuel's own breathing felt muted. Panic crept into his chest. Then he saw someone standing on the shoulder. A man, tall and painfully thin. He wore what looked like an old black suit, though it hung from his frame like wet cloth. His skin was pale enough to reflect the headlights. He wasn't waving. He wasn't moving. He was simply watching the truck pass. Samuel forced himself not to look. A mile later, his CB crackled again. This time, it was another trucker. "Blue Freightliner eastbound, you okay?" Samuel snatched the mic. "Yeah. Why?" A pause. "Because there's a man hanging off the back of your trailer." Samuel's blood turned to ice. "What?" "I can see him clear as day. He's climbing." Samuel checked his mirrors. At first, nothing. Then lightning flashed in the distance. For just an instant, he saw long fingers gripping the rear door handles of his trailer. A pale face pressed between them. Its mouth was open far too wide. Samuel nearly lost control. He accelerated. The truck behind him vanished around a curve. His CB fell silent again. 10 minutes later, he reached a way station that was closed for the night. He pulled onto the shoulder, unable to continue. He stepped out with a flashlight, his hands shaking so badly he almost dropped it. The rear doors of the trailer were covered in handprints, hundreds of them, small, large, fresh, as though pressed into the grime only moments earlier. And in the center of the right door, scratched deeply into the metal, were 4 words. "Let me ride inside." Samuel climbed back into the cab and locked every door. He drove straight to a truck stop outside Beckley. Inside, he found an older driver who had spent decades running Appalachian routes. When Samuel described the man on the shoulder, the driver's expression changed instantly. "You saw the hitchman," Samuel laughed nervously. "The what?" The old trucker leaned closer. "Back in 1964, a prison transport overturned near that tunnel during a storm. One inmate escaped into the woods. They found pieces of him weeks later, scattered across the mountain." Samuel felt his stomach tighten. "Animal attack?" The man slowly shook his head. "That's what they told the papers." He took a sip of coffee. "Since then, drivers report seeing a man asking for rides. If you ignore him, he follows. If you stop..." He did not finish the sentence. Samuel reviewed his dash cam at sunrise. The man on the shoulder never appeared, but the rear camera captured something far worse. For nearly 7 minutes, a pale figure clung to the back of his trailer, crawling upward with jerking, insect-like movements. At one point, it turned toward the camera. Its eyes were completely black, its jaw unhinged wider than seemed physically possible. Then, just before the footage cut to static, it smiled. Samuel quit long-haul trucking 3 months later. He took a local delivery job and never crossed the Appalachians again. To this day, he refuses to discuss what happened after the static began. He will only say one thing. When the video returned, the creature was no longer outside the trailer. It was standing directly behind his cab. If you enjoyed tonight's stories, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe for more true horror every week. And if you have a terrifying story of your own, send it to the email in my channel's profile. Your story might be featured in a future video. Thank you for watching, and remember, sometimes the scariest things aren't the ones you can see. Good night.